Immigration is a topic that is fraught with moral questions, and there is no consensus amongst Christians on how it should be viewed. On the one hand, Christians are called to love those on the margins, leading some to conclude that there should be fewer borders on immigration. However, others argue that mass migration leads to the disintegration of local communities and the uniqueness of particular nation states, and that people suffer in the absence of these things. More specifically, should Christians take issue with Suella Braverman's statement this week that the number of migrants crossing the Channel amounts to an invasion? Or what about the census results, which show that a record 1 in 6 people in this country were born abroad? Well, we have two Christians here on different perspectives who can discuss these questions and more. Still with me is the Reverend Michael Coren, Anglican priest and author, and Father Gavin Ashendon, the former chaplain to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you for joining me again for this fiery debate. I want to start off with yourself, Father Gavin. Is it immoral to describe Channel crossings as an invasion?
I don't think it's a very good question. With respect, I think we should change the question and ask what the effect of describing it as an invasion is. So those who are in favour of untrammeled immigration wouldn't want to describe it as that. They would want to describe it as the exercise of hospitality to a worldwide refugee problem. And they would probably think that we have the stability and the resources within our community to welcome and wipe up any number of people. When you ask actually what the limit is, you don't get an answer. On the other hand, there are people who think that our society is stretched already to its limit in terms of the healthcare, the education, and the infrastructure that it can provide for its citizens. And if you ask them, then they feel that 10,000 Albanian young men arriving in their shores feels like an invasion. So whether or not you argue it etymologically and say linguistically it is one, or whether you say that's insensitive in a humanitarian sense, it isn't one, the question I think has to be faced: do we have the resources to welcome this number of people in a worldwide migration crisis, and have the people of this country consented to it?
Okay, and then to you, Father Michael, what should the Christian view of immigration be as a whole?
I think that was a point very well made. I mean, a fundamental of this is the ability to discuss, which is why I've agreed to come on to a station where my views might not be flavour of the month, because I'm just sick and tired of both left and right refusing tolerance to other points of view. Look, I think the word invasion was incredibly ill-advised. More than that, I think it was ugly and unhelpful and destructive. It is entirely valid to have concerns about uncontrolled immigration, or certainly illegal immigration. That's entirely valid. My grandmother was born abroad. My father's family were East European Jews. I'm not sure if they came here legally or not, to be honest. There are all sorts of people who've come to this country by other means. But it is not unethical, it's not hysterical for people to say, what about us? Particularly working class people are often forgotten in this debate. But I don't think the Home Secretary achieved anything constructive, or, if you like, Christian, by using the word invasion. And I think she used the word purposefully. I think it was to cause a certain ripple of fear, and we can do better than that. Let's have an open discussion. The context as a Christian is we should welcome the stranger. We could argue in the Hebrew scriptures that's actually about welcoming people who were of other tribes, and we won't get into that. Yeah. But reasonable, moderate approach, no hyperbole, no harsh language, no putting down people who simply have a different point of view. That's the Christian way forward.
I'm with you both. I think you're both talking a lot of sense. But there are a lot of people that, I get this rebuttal all the time, but you're a Christian, therefore you should be welcoming everyone. But the Bible isn't about having open borders. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I've got one short scripture reading. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord portion is his people. And that's Deuteronomy. There's also much more on this in Acts. The boundaries of our nations, and nations and tribes is a theme throughout the Bible, were defined by God. Therefore, is there not a Christian duty to protect our nations and our borders? Father Gavin.
Michael and I are almost swapping positions. I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea there's a Christian view on this. Not because I can't invent one, but because I think the way the discussion works is most people start off with their conclusion, which is I'm uncomfortable or I'm comfortable with this happening. And then they find a reason for justifying it. And I think to find your reason for justifying it and then say, well, it's Christian, is actually is inappropriate. It's not the right thing to do. I hope all my views are Christian, because I bring them to God when I pray, and I process them and I challenge them. And if there's a stranger in my village where I live, I'll want to go and welcome him. I don't think that can be expanded to welcoming hundreds of thousands of people into a community without permission, where the infrastructure won't cope with it. That simply isn't the same principle. And so is there a Christian view on this? I would say the Christian view would be, how do you provide for the greatest stability and coherence of a society so that the people who live in it can flourish? And the answer is, to my mind, the levels of uncontrolled immigration that we're experiencing don't do that. So my Christian view would be, don't have them.
Okay, and to Father Michael, should we be aiming for a borderless world?
Yes, but we also have to be practical. I mean, if resources and facilities had no limit, that would be something different. But we do have to protect people, particularly the most vulnerable. And we all know that those who are nearer the bottom, who have less, they will be the first to suffer if hospitals are overcrowded, if there are difficulties with food supply and so on. But I'll say again, the language has to be changed radically. There's not an invasion. The idea that somehow, and I saw this in the United States, that everyone crossing a border is about to do crime and hurt others is simply untrue. We have, if at all possible, to welcome as many people as we can, reasonably and responsibly. I think there is a scriptural basis to that, but look, as Christians, we live in the real world, and as was just said, and extremely pertinent, it's one thing to be kind and generous and good to the person in the village, to give individual help to people. When it comes to mass policy, to international policy, to completely open a border will mean almost certainly that specific areas of the country, working people will suffer terribly because of that. So all of these things can be considered by responsible politicians, Christian or not. My problem with the current language is we're now hearing that everyone who comes to the UK is given a free car. I mean, it's simply untrue. Everyone is treated like a lord. It's simply untrue. There are terrible conditions. One of my daughters worked in Calais and saw what was really going on. It was absolutely dreadful. But if we, I suppose, increase the volume of language, we decrease the volume of empathy and understanding and intelligent, forward-looking, progressive policies. That, I believe, is the Christian response. Moderation, empathy, understanding, kindness. I'm not convinced, are you, that we're seeing it currently from the Home Secretary and others in government?
I mean, I'll put it to Father Gavin in a minute, but I think the reason we're seeing such high volume, as you call it, language is because people are so impassioned by this, and it is such an issue. And you said that not all people crossing are criminals, but we saw in the Telegraph this week that 50% of asylum seekers are not legitimate. And we've seen the rise in crime from Albanian gangs coming over, and we've also seen a lot of these problems in grooming gangs across the country. So we are seeing problems as a direct result of the increase in illegal and legal immigration in the country. I think that's why.
Remember, grooming gangs, some of those communities came here legally.
But I said illegal and legal. But this is the problem. People are so impassioned because they care, and it's affecting their everyday lives. I think that's probably why the language is getting dialed up a bit. Father Gavin, how do we tone it down a bit? How do we bring some moderation to this conversation?
Oh, well, once again, I'm going to disappoint you. I don't think I do want moderation. I think we have a problem with enormous consequences. And I'm very sympathetic to Suella Braverman using the word invasion, because although I think you could argue against it, she's doing it in order to ramp the political debate up. See, I have a small house in northern France, which is the most wonderful place, and I prefer to live there than in England, frankly. But the idea that the people in Calais are coming to England because they can't find political asylum in France is just nonsense. It's a far better culture over there, I think. They're coming for two reasons. One is that English is an accessible language that people have and French isn't, and that our state benefits are so enormously generous, and we don't get rid of people. I can't live in France. I'm only allowed 90 days there for 6 months. Why should these people who are... I don't understand why these people should be given a particular exemption from the rules and the laws that everybody else is exempt from, and at the same time doing it in a way where our infrastructure can't cope. I'm surrounded by elderly people who are desperate in real pain for knee and hip and other operations. And that the idea that we can simply take in the world's refugees and not displace our own vulnerable and elderly is just improper.
I'm with you. I want to give the last word to Father Michael, but if you can cut it down to 30 seconds, that would be helpful. But Father Ashendon, there's one thing I found something to disagree with you on. The culture in France is not better than the culture in England.
We're not taking in refugees. The countries that are taking the world's refugees are more like countries in Asia and Turkey are taking huge numbers of people. We've taken a relatively small number of people. Many of the people we have taken in over the last decades are the very people who perform the hip surgeries and the knee replacements in our hospitals. And I'm sorry, these people is not a term I'm comfortable with. Anytime we marginalise, most of the people who want to come to Britain are doing it out of desperation. A small number have ulterior motives, I would agree. And we have to be selective and elective. But let's be moderate and empathetic.
I'm not sure the evidence backs you up, but thank you for your stance nevertheless. That was the Reverend Michael Coren, Anglican priest and author, and Father Gavin Ashendon, the former chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you both.